Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm JC Owens, and this is Rock My World, episode 21, A Family Affair. Now, some of you may have heard this before, but for those who haven't, we are going to basically start from the beginning. Now, some years back, a young girl by the name of Bridget Doho d'Avignon uh, found out while she did a research project for her school class that actually found out that every sitting U.S. president in history, with the exception of like Martin Van Buren, has been blood related to each other through, John Lackland, as his father and brother called him. Him being the younger brother, he didn't inherit any land. You'll remember him from things like Robin Hood, right? Like the evil king in the story of Robin Hood. Well, that's the guy. Yeah, the guy that like had the Magna Carta signed, on his watch and all that kind of stuff because of his greediness and all that kind of stuff. Well, you see, it turns out that all of our U.S. presidents, for the most part, have all been related to this one guy. They're all one big family. It turns out that, like, the whole world's infrastructure, like, of leadership is, one big family one way or the other. I've talked, in the past about this, and I intend to do an episode later, talking about this and exactly how the control network, across the globe runs, and, the families involved and whatnot. They say, 300 families roughly. There are 300 all across the globe. But for right now, we're going to focus on this one just right here in our home country, the U.S. And that being said, the quote that you hear from people attached to like 33rd degree Master Mason Albert Pike, some say, like, I put it as we will give them their heroes, which that's a paraphrasing, but basically in his book Morals and Dogma, he lays out that all of your heroes, your presidents, all of those figures that we remember from the history books that we're encouraged to look up to, they've been placed there on purpose. This is why nothing ever really truly changes unless it benefits the globalist agenda. Doesn't matter what lies they tell you, left or right, it always seems to benefit the same agenda. Well, it's because the whole world is ran by these 300 families, and the U.S. is no different. The U.S. is no different. I've talked before about my own family, history with this stuff, and, I'm a descendant of Sacagawea. I have multiple, other family members that pop up in the historical record. Right, and that's how, that's how my grandfather's chief of police, and all these kind of things. The people running the United States and its cities are not just nobodies. These bloodlines go back for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And you can't really get away from it. Every once in a while, somebody who seems to be unaffiliated will get in there, but you'll find out that they apprenticed under someone within the family structure themselves. They're a protege of this person or that, right? Maybe somebody didn't have children, so they went and basically adopted someone and taught them what they knew instead, right? This kind of stuff happens, especially considering that within these mystery school sects and these families, it's rather normal for people to, swing this way or that. Like, they don't really care whether someone is male, female, whatever. They do whatever. They don't really believe in the order of things. Like, they do things upside down on purpose. So, it's of no never mind to them. So then, that's why, when you look at Freemasonry and the Order of the Eastern Star, even though the Eastern Star is made up of women, they still call them brother. The end goal, with all this transhumanism stuff, is to get rid of the distinctions. They don't want there to be distinctions between male, female, old, young. They don't want any of this. They want everything to be ran like a machine. And this kind of stuff has too much to do with human emotions, right? Human emotions are complicated. This is why they like machines so much. It's because we're emotional. This is why they want to replace all of us, actual musical people with robots and AI. Because the robots and AI don't fight back. They don't fight back. And, if you go in looking into all this stuff, you will see it's the same names that keep popping up over and over and over again. Every once in a while, they will, change their last name, this, that, and the other. So that's one of the things they don't tell you about things like the Civil War here in the U.S. That was organized across the pond in England. That's where all that was birthed. You see, after the English Civil War and the American Revolutionary War, Britain was broke. They were broke. They had no money. The nobility were flat out. They were losing their giant estates. They were going bankrupt, and they got an idea. We'll marry our children off to the industrialists in America. So they did. They married their children off to American industrialists. The British nobility needed money. The American industrialists from the North needed titles. Like the people who ran the American South didn't need titles because most all of our families came from nobility to begin with. We already had them and gave them up to come here. So, and be an American, right? But those in the North still wanted them quite badly, and they mixed in with the British elite. They mixed in with them deeply, and that's how the U.S. Civil War got stirred up. They don't care about slavery. It was the East India Trading Company in Great Britain that basically ran that whole thing to begin with, and then they outlawed it because they knew they could use it as a wedge to break America in half. It was a long-running plan to bring us back under control of the British Empire, and that's what happened after the Civil War. After the Civil War, the Act of 1871 gets signed, and that basically puts us back under control of the British Central Bank, unofficially. And then, later on you get Bretton Woods, Creature from Jekyll Island, all this kind of stuff. It's all connected, folks. None of these things are happening in a vacuum. This is why studying history is so important, so you can keep up with these things, and you can trace these family lines. You can trace them right up until today, most of them. And for instance, look at someone like Anderson Cooper on CNN. He's actually a Vanderbilt. His mother was a Vanderbilt, one of the elite families that run the U.S. Right? You look at Tucker Carlson. I'm pretty sure Tucker Carlson is a Swanson of the Swanson, chicken broth people, right? It's one big club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin said. That's why I want to teach you folks the truth about what all is going on. I do not agree with the way they want to do things. I'm a rock and roller. I don't believe in holding people down and forcing them to do all this stuff. I don't believe in breaching people's privacy and being all up in their business. Yes, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and no, I don't agree with a lot of things like the left do. I don't agree with a lot of things the right do either. At the end of the day, they're all serving the same agenda. I say this all the time, and I have to keep reinforcing it. Right versus left. They drive the agenda like fire versus water drives a steam engine. It's the same game all throughout history. They may change their names, like I said. They may hide and sneak around in the underground, but they'll always pop back up and try to start this agenda over. This one world empire, this bringing Atlantis up out of the depths, as it were, has been their mission since at least Sir Francis Bacon, but I would argue for, and I have evidence for it going all the way back to Plato. You're talking about ancient Greece. And, really and honestly, from the biblical point of view, it goes all the way back to Nimrod and his Tower of Babel. That was the first one world empire where they tried to merge the languages and tried to build a tower to heaven. And, on that point, like, what else are all these rockets that Elon Musk and, SpaceX and, Amazon and all that, like, what are those but towers to heaven, like, on their own? I'm just saying, they're like giant obelisks with rocket engines in the bottom. Just saying. But yeah, if you look at the ancient historical record, it showed like that before the flood, people had, you look, for instance, look at the Bhagavad Gita. Like nuclear technology, like was loosely based on what was in those texts, right? The ancients were telling us things. They left us these things for a reason. And I'm one of these people that, like, I believe a lot of what they said was true. I think that what our ancestors left us is probably more true than a lot of the things that our current world leaders are telling us. Right? Like, and I definitely intend to get into this more as we go forward, but that will be a topic for another day. Obviously, the studio has been slow roll, but we're moving along. We're getting more and more equipment in here and things like that. But I will keep you folks updated, and we will catch y'all later on.